Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a completely different way to look at the architecture of human existence. Look, most of us have been sold this pervasive, totally exhausting lie. The idea that life is this highly fragile system that needs constant micromanagement, perfect planning, and absolute insulation from any kind of shock. So what do? We build walls, we obsess over schedules, and we desperately try to engineer the unexpected right out of our lives. But what if we've got the foundational mechanics entirely backwards? What if life isn't some fragile machine, but a self-organizing game that literally requires the unexpected in order to function? Today, we're going to explore how to navigate life's inherent unpredictability, not with this baseline of constant anxiety, but with playful wisdom and highly strategic risk. It's time to dismantle the illusion of control and start building a new operating system that's actually designed for the reality of the world we live in. Seriously, think about why the relentless pursuit of control leaves you feeling so fundamentally depleted. Well, it's because you're suffering from what systems architects call complexity fatigue. Honestly, it's the defining condition of modern life. We are constantly trying to optimize every single variable: our careers, our relationships, our macros, our sleep schedules. We're trying to force a fundamentally wild, unpredictable reality into a highly predictable, color-coded spreadsheet. Just think about the last time you hyper-scheduled a vacation down to 15-minute increments, only for your flight to get delayed or a thunderstorm to roll in and it triggered a total mental meltdown, right? It is a draining, completely futile attempt to engineer certainty. The universe simply does not want to be put in a box. When you fight the foundational volatility of the world, you burn out because you're using all your psychological energy to build a tiny little dam against a massive churning ocean. Now, we're usually presented with this false choice when it comes to structuring our reality. On one extreme, you have rigid order. This is that deeply comforting illusion of static safety. We crave it instinctively, for sure. But here's the catch. Biological, social, and psychological systems that become too rigid inevitably breed tyranny and stagnation. Think of a petrified forest. It's totally solid, completely safe from changing its form, but it's also entirely dead. Then, on the complete opposite extreme, you have absolute chaos. This is the total dissolution of systems. It's essentially a gaseous state where atoms just bounce off each other randomly. In that state, nothing can take hold, no complex structures can be built, and critical information just gets completely lost in the noise. For a long time, we operated under this assumption that we had to choose between defending the petrified forest or surrendering to the gaseous noise. But the truth is, neither of these extremes can actually support life or growth. All right, let's get into Section 1, Life at Chaos Edge, or what we call the liquid phase transition. To really crack the code on this, we need to look at evolutionary biology, specifically the work of theoretical biologist Stuart Kauffman. He discovered something amazing: the capacity to compute, to store memory, to adapt, and to truly live only exists on a razor-thin phase transition boundary known as the edge of chaos. Let's break that down. Think of the states of water. Ice represents rigid order, right? The molecules are locked in a grid, they can't flow, they can't adapt to a new container. Steam represents absolute chaos. The molecules are just way too frenetic and dispersed to hold any shape or retain any structural information. But liquid water, that sweet spot right on the boundary between solid and gas, that is where life happens. It flows, it carves canyons, it adapts to its environment, yet it holds enough cohesion to sustain complex biology. A system can only compute and evolve when it operates strictly on this volatile boundary line. And listen, this isn't just some abstract biological theory you'd find in a textbook. This is literally the governing dynamic of reality. Natural selection actively pulls co-evolving complex systems away from static peace and drives them straight into this boundary region. Think about a thriving Amazon rainforest or a highly functioning free market economy. They aren't perfectly ordered, predictable machines, but they aren't in a state of total fiery anarchy either. They're constantly bubbling. You see small destructions, rapid creations, continuous adaptations. The universe actively favors systems that are poised right on the brink of chaos, because that is the exact, and frankly, the only location where they have the flexibility needed to survive a shifting environment. The blunt truth: if you're seeking a life of absolute, unchanging peace, you're essentially seeking evolutionary death. Moving on to Section 2, Wisdom of the Holy Fool and Breaking the Blueprint. So how does a sovereign individual actually embody this biological edge in the everyday world? Well, we can find the answer in a very specific psychological archetype, the Holy Fool. Take Alan Watts, for example. He famously described himself not as some untouchable guru, but as a philosophical entertainer. In his later years, holding court in his library over in Muir Woods, Watts would frequently just erupt into these massive, body-shaking belly laughs. And that laugh wasn't just a reaction to a joke. It was a deliberate architectural tool. Watts understood that intellectual boxes and rigid societal blueprints are the very foundation of human illusion. By laughing, by playfully breaking the self-serious rules of the room, he was actively shattering the rigid, petrified structures of the mind. He merged the cosmic and the comic to basically pull people back to that liquid, adaptable edge of chaos. You see, throughout human history, the trickster archetype has served a deeply vital function. We see this with the Cynic philosophers of ancient Greece, the Byzantine monks they called the fools for Christ, and the Russian Eurodivy. Now, the Eurodivy didn't just stand around telling jokes. They would walk into the freezing winter streets completely naked, or throw raw meat at the feet of a pious czar during a strict religious fast. They deliberately and shockingly violated social decorum. And they didn't do this because they were ignoring reality. Actually, they did it because they saw reality far more clearly than the rest of society did. They recognized the dogmatic blueprints and those oppressive rules for what they really were, incredibly fragile constructs. By refusing to take the simulation's artificial panic seriously, they forced the culture around them to question its own rigid insanity. We've got to start recognizing subversive humor and playful disruption for what they truly are. They are essential mechanisms for creative destruction. In systems architecture, if a system can't destroy its own outdated rules, it's eventually going to collapse under its own weight. The trickster is a vital chaos agent for system renewal. They introduce just enough volatility into a rigid environment to give it permission to self-reorganize. So how do you implement this? Think about a moment of acute modern stress. Maybe your office is in an absolute panic over a missed quarterly metric, or some minor logistical error has totally derailed your week. Instead of tightening up and absorbing that collective anxiety, adopt that playful wisdom. Inject a little well-timed trickster chaos. Point out the sheer absurdity of the situation. Just a subtle break in decorum acts like a pressure release valve. It keeps your mind and the people around you from ossifying in fear. Which brings us to Section 3, Anti-Fragility and the Spinning Disc, the mechanics of dynamic balance. Let's pivot to the physical execution of this philosophy, using Nassim Nicholas Taleb's triad to understand exactly how we handle sudden, high-stakes situations without losing our center. Whenever they face volatility, systems fall into one of three categories. First, you have the fragile system. This is harmed by disorder. Think of a glass coffee cup shattering when you drop it on the floor. Second is the robust system. This one just resists disorder. A cast iron skillet takes the hit, it doesn't break, sure, but it doesn't change or improve either. But the third category? That is our architectural goal, the anti-fragile system. An anti-fragile system actually requires disorder, shocks, and stress to improve. It thrives on them. Think of the mythical Hydra. You cut off one head, and two grow back in its place. Or just think of your own immune system. It only gets significantly stronger by being continuously exposed to external pathogens. The goal is to actively transition our lives away from fragile defense mechanisms and build systems that harvest information and strength directly from the volatility. Now, anti-fragility is not just some philosophical buzzword you throw around at dinner parties. It operates on a strict mathematical guarantee called a convex response curve. Basically, as stress and volatility increases, an anti-fragile system experiences disproportionately more benefit than harm. It doesn't just survive shocks. It actively uses them to map its environment and upgrade its own code. Think about the mechanics of lifting weights. You are intentionally introducing acute physical stress. You're creating thousands of micro tears in your muscle fibers. It's a localized, chaotic event. But how does your biological system respond? By overcompensating. It repairs the tissue to be denser and stronger than it was before. Small-scale chaos and daily shocks act as the evolutionary fuel you need for a resilient life. You do not hide from the wind, you use it to spin the windmill. To really lock this in, let's contrast two physical models, the rigid beam versus the spinning disc. The rigid beam relies on perfect centering and absolute unyielding motionlessness. And yeah, it feels incredibly safe, but it is the dangerous illusion of static control. The second a single unexpected lateral pressure hits that beam, it has nowhere to displace the energy. So what happens? It inevitably violently snaps. Now contrast that with the spinning disc. The spinning disc doesn't stay upright by remaining still. It stays upright precisely because it is in continuous active motion. It's making constant, subtle micro-corrections under its center of gravity. So when pressure hits the disc, it doesn't snap. It absorbs the momentum, tilts just slightly, and uses that very energy to recalculate and maintain its balance. If you take away anything from this explainer, internalize this as an absolute, non-negotiable law of systemic physics. Motion itself is the stability. True freedom and true resilience are literally never found in stopping
resting permanently, or hiding from the variables of the world. True stability is found in mastering the speed and direction of your continuous corrections. Imagine a crisis hits, a major project at work falls apart, or you get some sudden, really difficult news. A rigid mind snaps under that pressure because it's paralyzed by the deviation from the plan. But if you operate as the spinning disk, every tilt, every shock, every unexpected event is just a signal for a sovereign correction. You absorb the data, adjust your center of gravity, and you keep moving. The continuous motion doesn't tire you out. It is precisely the engine that keeps you standing in a chaotic world. Finally, Section 4, Becoming the Sovereign Wanderer and Executing the Architecture.
So here is the operational architecture for the modern seeker. First, you absolutely must consciously stop seeking static peace. It's a biological and psychological trap, and it just leads to a diminished, petrified version of yourself. Second, embrace dynamic balance, or what we call active readiness. Become that spinning disk. Move fluidly through the variables instead of constantly bracing against them. Third, intentionally love the wind. Go out and expose yourself to small stressors. Challenge your own deeply held dogmas, and use the volatility of life to actually build your own anti-fragility. And finally, commit to operating at the edge of chaos. Recognize that chaos is not the enemy. It's the essential required initiation rite that tears down false, rigid walls, allowing you to gather those stones and build a reality of entirely conscious design. So the next time the wind starts howling and your perfectly rigid plans begin to crack and fail, ask yourself, are you going to exhaust yourself desperately trying to hold those crumbling walls up, or are you going to use that momentum to start building a windmill? If you are finally ready to stop fighting the volatility of the world and start actively harvesting it, I invite you to dive into the deeper documentation vault. Come explore the full structural architecture of this philosophy over at journey.cwx.xyz. The blueprint is waiting for you. Check, document, execute. Stay limber, abide, and keep wondering.